Sometimes, a person lives not to survive, but to endure pain. Sometimes, people don't live to survive at all. They live to cling to pain. This may sound harsh. It may even feel unfair, because we usually see ourselves as beings fighting to stay alive. We hold on to hope, we search for a way out, we turn toward the light. But when you step into Dostoyevsky's world, another possibility slowly takes shape in front of you. A quieter, darker one. What if we don't always truly want hope? Now ask yourself this question, but don't answer it yet. In your life, when there was a moment where you genuinely could have changed direction, why did you return to the same mistake? Why didn't you stay where you could have healed, but instead went back to a thought, a person, a habit that hurt you? Was it coincidence, or was it a conscious choice? Dostoyevsky's characters don't avoid this question. They walk straight into it. The underground man Raskolnikov, Ivan Karamazov, different faces, different lives, yet they all arrive at the same place. Sometimes, a person rejects their own salvation, because hope is not as innocent as we want it to be. At first, hope feels comforting. It offers an exit, a promise, a distant one day. But hope also demands something in return. If hope exists, you must change. And once hope appears, your excuses begin to lose their power. Dostoyevsky touches on an uncomfortable truth here. Most of the time, people don't really want change. They want relief without transformation. Think about the underground man. He humiliates himself, looks down on others, deepens his loneliness deliberately. His life is not truly hopeless. There are paths open to him. He could connect. He could live differently. But he refuses, because hope would make him responsible. Hope says, you could be different. And for some people, that sentence is unbearable. Perhaps the greatest human fear is not failure. Perhaps it is the possibility of success. Because if you succeed, you can no longer take refuge in your pain. You lose the safety of the victim identity. The places where you can assign blame begin to disappear. And it is precisely here that a person kills hope, quietly, without an audience. When hope disappears, an invisible contract is signed with the self. You no longer have to try. You no longer have to wait. You no longer have to carry the exhausting weight of who you might become. And most importantly, you no longer have to face the most frightening possibility of all, that you might actually change. Because change doesn't just challenge your pain. It invalidates all the defenses you've built over years. It forces you to look at your choices, your silences, your escapes, the people you chose, the beliefs you relied on, all at once. And that view is often unbearable. It's easy to believe you're suffering. But realizing that, for a long time, you helped sustain that suffering with your own hands shatters the most comforting lie you've ever told yourself. That's why Dostoyevsky's characters don't reject hope dramatically. They don't destroy it with a single decision. They sabotage it in small, quiet ways. They delay. They turn procrastination into a habit. They silence the faint but honest voice inside that says, now is the moment. They whisper to themselves, this isn't the right time, or this is all I'm capable of anyway. They belittle the possibility of healing within themselves. Until that belittlement becomes an identity. They are no longer who they could be, but someone who believes they never could be. And strangely, that belief offers comfort. Their limits feel clear. Their expectations shrink. They convince themselves they have nowhere to fall. When in truth, they've stopped walking just to avoid falling. Dostoyevsky points to a dark comfort zone here. Pain is familiar. Despair is learned. The person has mastered their own darkness. But light demands an experience. It demands the courage to make mistakes, to stumble like a child again. And the adult, especially the one who has fallen many times, often can't tolerate that vulnerability. Pride steps in. Old wounds are mistaken for wisdom. I've tried this before becomes a polite excuse for never truly trying at all. That's why Dostoyevsky's characters belittle themselves, push others away, even make deliberately wrong choices. Wrong choices are familiar. Right ones are unknown. And sometimes the right choice is terrifyingly obvious. Obvious truth leaves you exposed. You have nowhere to hide. So when a person kills hope, they don't destroy the future. They erase the possibility of confronting themselves. At first, this brings relief, a strange sense of peace. Expectations fade. Disappointment feels less threatening. It seems like self-protection. But this peace doesn't last. Over time, it hardens into numbness. What looks like indifference is often nothing more than suppressed regret. And Dostoyevsky doesn't moralize here. He doesn't lecture. He simply holds up a mirror and says, "Look. Look at how little of this is rational. Look at how much of it is fear." In Dostoyevsky's world, this choice is neither heroic nor purely weak. It's simply human. Humans are rarely as good or as evil as they imagine themselves to be. Most of the time, they are afraid. And fear takes people to strange places, sometimes far enough to lock the door to their own salvation. This is why Dostoyevsky unsettles us. Because his characters are not distant. Their ways of killing hope are familiar. We do the same things. We delay. We minimize. We give up, not out loud, but internally, in places no one hears. And perhaps the most painful truth is this: when people kill hope, they don't call it tragedy. They call it maturity. They say, "I don't expect anything anymore," without realizing they've silenced their own inner voice. They say, "I've become realistic," when what they've really done is abandon their own potential. And while doing all this, they believe they're protecting themselves. But what Dostoyevsky whispers is far more disturbing. Sometimes, people are not protecting themselves from pain. They are protecting themselves from healing. According to Dostoyevsky, human beings are not creatures of logic. They often act against it. They harm themselves just to feel free. They choose the wrong path simply to say, "This is who I am." Because pain is familiar. Hope is not. Be honest with yourself. Is there a thought in your life that keeps you unhappy, yet feels impossible to let go of? A belief you've carried for years that quietly pulls you down? "This is just how I am. This is all I can do. This is my story." These phrases often sound like acceptance, but in reality, they are the gravestones of hope. This conflict becomes sharper in Raskolnikov's story. He wants to escape being ordinary. He tries to invent his own morality. He believes that if he crosses a certain line, he will become someone else. But Dostoyevsky reveals something unsettling. When a person tries to transcend themselves, they cannot escape themselves. The crime is not what destroys Raskolnikov. The confrontation afterward does. His real suffering is not what he did. Hope still exists. Confession, change, another path, all remain possible. But he fights that hope, because hope would shatter the identity he built. And sometimes, a person prefers a false identity over a true life. Here, a disturbing question emerges. Do we love our identity, or do we love our pain? Some pains become woven into who we are. If we lose them, we fear we'll lose ourselves. Dostoyevsky doesn't romanticize pain. He simply shows how seductive it can be. Why does a person kill their own hope? Because hope forces self-confrontation. And self-confrontation means stopping the search for someone else to blame. Fate, childhood, circumstances, they can only carry you so far. At some point, responsibility lands in your hands. And that moment is heavier than most people expect. Responsibility is colder than pain. Pain can be shared. Responsibility is carried alone. No one else can shoulder it for you. This is where Dostoyevsky's characters begin to collapse. Blaming fate works for a while. Pointing to childhood helps for a while. Telling the story of wounds and losses offers comfort. But when hope appears, those explanations slowly lose their power. The question shifts from "why did I become this way?" to "why am I still here?" And that question has nothing to do with the past. It belongs entirely to the present. At that threshold, a choice appears. Either you keep displaying old wounds to escape the present, or you learn to live with them and take responsibility for your share. Dostoyevsky suggests that this second path is the one humans fear most, because it comes without excuses, without decoration, and it leaves you exposed to yourself. You can no longer dramatize your story. You can no longer hide behind circumstances. Hope still stands there, whispering, "Despite all this, you can act." That whisper destabilizes everything you've relied on. It makes old explanations feel insufficient. That's why confrontation is often experienced not as virtue, but as threat. To confront yourself doesn't mean forgiving your mistakes. It means finally seeing them. Here, Dostoyevsky's darkness deepens. Humanity's greatest burden is not guilt, it is freedom. Because if you are free, you chose. And if you chose, there is a price. Hope makes that price visible. It refuses postponement. It demands presence. And that's why people don't realize that by killing hope, they are running from freedom itself. They hide behind the conditions they believe imprison them, while the real chains now live inside. Perhaps the most tragic part is this. While believing they are rejecting responsibility, people quietly stop being witnesses to their own lives. Remember Ivan Karamazov's rebellion. He doesn't rebel against God. He rebels against injustice. In a world where children suffer, he says, no happiness can be accepted. It sounds moral, strong, almost noble. But Dostoyevsky asks something far more unsettling. Is this rebellion truly about justice? Or is it a way to avoid confronting one's own inner darkness? Ivan's struggle is not with God. It is with meaning. And where meaning collapses, he rejects hope. Because hope contains maybe. Ivan wants certainty, a final rejection, final darkness. It feels safer than uncertainty. Maybe people kill hope because hope requires patience. It doesn't promise instant solutions. It says, not yet. It says, endure this for a while. But modern humans are impatient. They don't know how to sit with pain. They want immediate healing or complete surrender. Waiting, staying, transforming, these are difficult disciplines. When hope is killed, relief appears, a strange calm. Expectations disappear. Disappointment feels less dangerous. It looks like peace, but inside, it carries a heavy numbness. Over time, feeling fades. Dostoyevsky's characters often live here, neither fully alive nor completely dead. This is why Dostoyevsky doesn't comfort you. He doesn't promise happy endings. He doesn't say everything will be fine. He does something harder. He makes you look inward. He asks why hope feels threatening to you. And sometimes, that question weighs more than any answer. If this feels familiar, don't rush to blame yourself. Dostoyevsky doesn't blame. He tries to understand. People don't fall because they are weak, but because they are complex. So consider this. What does hope mean to you? A real possibility? Or an idea you keep at a safe distance? Dostoyevsky's darkness is an invitation. Look, he says. Not quickly. Not defensively. Just look. Notice when, how, and why you silenced hope. Because perhaps humanity's true tragedy is not being hopeless, but refusing hope even when it is possible. Only a question, left with you, not to be answered immediately. Not today. Maybe much later. If hope will change you, do you really want it?